Kevin Zay, why is it that some people have such a grave misunderstanding regarding how paper and cloth masks are designed to work? I can't tell you how many times I've had to explain that these types of masks were designed to keep the wearer from slinging spittle as far as possible without them, and not to protect the wearer from becoming infected. Even then, most still don't get it. Is this a big case of cognitive dissonance, or are there other factors also at play? Thanks for the question, Kevin. And apparently, what we're hearing from research released this week, it might well be that the protection goes actually both ways. So wouldn't that be even more interesting here? But clearly, we know that masks are about protecting other people from your emissions, so to speak, I think is the primary focus of what those things are about. And you can make a lot of assumptions real quick, and a lot of people do, have a lot of hot takes on why it is that people are not willing to wear masks, not willing to go out with their faces covered, or not paying attention to safety protocols or guidelines, don't care what Dr. Fauci says, don't care about the health protocols or any of that. They just don't care, right? And what's all that about? Well, there's a lot of things at play there. Everything from American independence, the independent attitude, the rugged individualism of the core American spirit is at play there, and some people take that to a level of patriotic pride that exceeds any kind of common sense. We are certainly seeing a lot of that. There are people who are of a kind of libertarian nature, I guess you could say, or who get into sort of an the anti-science thing is sort of is related, but really that spirit of independence and attitude, and my body is my thing, and I will do what I will with it, and there's nothing you're going to say about it, is it's a fascinating argument, because it happens to be the exact same argument that is used by the I shouldn't say pro-abortion, but I should say pro-choice crowd. Which is, of course, logic I agree with. It's an argument that I agree with, but it's actually the same logic: my body, my temple, my choice. The problem, of course, with that logic being applied in this case is that it's not something that just affects you. When you are a spreader of a viral infection, then you are endangering the lives of other people. In fact, every single person you come in contact with. And that is the difference between the abortion argument and the mask argument. So no false equivalencies here. I'm just saying the logic is very similar there. There are a lot of other factors at play here, too. There have been pushbacks against science as an institution. From the beginning of the pandemic, that has certainly been the case. But this is really a long-term problem. And I've sort of thought that it's not necessarily an anti-authority stance or an anti-intellectualism stance, although there is certainly, elements of that, because it's more of these people buy into other different authority figures who tell them that those authority figures are wrong, right? Dr. Fauci is wrong, and all these people, prattling on at a mad rate about how infectious diseases work and how my rights have to be impinged upon in order for the country to be safe. Those people don't know what they're talking about. They don't have a clue. Well, underneath that, and underneath the logic of the my body, my choice argument, and underneath all of this stuff, in broad terms, you're going to find emotional needs again. And I'm going to keep coming back to that phrase because it's kind of a good catch-all. We even talked about it in the Friday night Critical Conversations show a little bit, that, emotional needs is a broad bucket, okay? It could be, but I'm trying to get across that what I'm trying to communicate with that is that people are driven by their emotions to make the major decisions and minor decisions of their lives for the most part. That's a very non-controversial thing to say when it comes to how our decision-making processes work. Without getting too much into all the technical details of it, which I don't even necessarily know myself as far as all the names and labels and all that stuff, The concept here is that our brain is the center of thought. This is what's doing our thinking. Okay, this and the rest of our body, in terms of how the interactions of that. This is how we come to our decision making. But it's not just here, it's also the social factors, cultural factors, the social hierarchies that we exist in. Those also have an effect on how we think, what we accept as true, what our standard of evidence is, what we think is false, what we think is good, what we think is bad. All of these are in the mix. And what we don't have up here, and this is kind of hard to get, but for some people, but it's actually a very fine and very important point. This is not a truth detector. This is not a truth machine. We don't have a tendency or an organic process that ferrets out truth. So what we accept as true is based on our education, language, culture, background, right? All these factors. It's not what is objectively true or even what can be proven with evidence to be shown as true or false. Those are things we use to back up the decisions or ideas or things we've already accepted as true. And then we find the evidence, or we find these various things, and we use them in arguments, and we use them in conversation and, in talking to one another. And that's kind of how this all plays out, is we are going through life trying to stay alive, trying to survive, trying to make our way. And the function of the brain is to regulate the systems of the body primarily. But when it comes to thinking, it's about assessing environmental dangers and environmental advantages and leveraging those for your own personal and your social survival. So any information that fits in there that will go into those slots that you can think with and that makes sense to you, that's pretty much the standard of evidence most people have. Does it make sense to me? Does it help me in my life? Does this forward my goals and agenda? Or does it not? Is this somehow counter to what I'm trying to do, counter to my survival? If so, that's bad. If it helps me, if it helps forward my survival, if it helps me, and this is all perception, mind you. This is not objective facts I'm talking about. I'm talking about from the point of view of the person. This is how they evaluate information. So it doesn't have to be true objectively or false subject. I mean, it doesn't really, that's not the issue. That doesn't matter. It's, can the person accept it? Does it meet their standard of evidence? And does it align with the things that they've already set up, the filters they've already created through growing up, learning a language, learning a culture, acclimating to that culture within their social hierarchy, right? All these factors. Does it match up with all of those things? Does it check all the boxes it needs to check in order to be in agreement with all these things I've already accepted as true and which are already important in my life and which must continue to be true in order for my life to have emotional meaning and satisfaction? You see, that's kind of what the questions, the boxes that have to be checked in order for a piece of information to be accepted as true or not. So the fact is that most of us don't stay alive for very long if most of what we're accepting is false. You end up in a ditch. You end up doing something stupid. You end up winning a Darwin Award, and then you're dead. So for the most part, we seek objective truth because objective truth aligns with our survival for the most part. You want to believe true things. You want to operate on factual information because that's what works. But when it comes to opinion, when it comes to things or things that are completely opinion-based, anything goes. Objective reality isn't a factor. Doesn't have to be. When it comes to things like how should a society be organized, right? Politics. Government, religion. These are big, big topics. We invest a lot of our thinking in both of those particular topics, but neither one of them is based on objective reality. They use objective reality to make points, make arguments, provide evidence of claims, But really, it's all just kind of opinion. I think the country should be run this way. Well, I think the country should be run this way. Well, let's hash it out, right? And then you figure out how it's going to run. Where I'm going with all this is that there's a lot of our lives that are not necessarily based on objective reality or facts. They're based on opinions, and we treat these things as facts. We worship them sometimes too. We get really into this stuff. So this is what establishes for ourselves our standards of evidence and what we're willing to believe. So when it comes to the mask issue now, getting back to that specific topic, if you come from a culture or a background where personal liberty, as defined by you, right? This idea that you can do anything you want, anytime you want, because that's you and that's how life should be. If that's the background and culture that you come from, and everybody in your social circle agrees with that, then when somebody comes in and says, here's a regulation you have to follow for the safety of everybody, well, you and your cohorts are like, no, we don't think that that's true. I don't have to do that. And they'll refute it. They'll just push right back on it, just automatically. It doesn't even matter what the facts of the matter are. They just don't want to do it. And then they find all the reasons why they shouldn't have to do it or don't have to do it. It's economically disruptive. It's an invasion of my privacy. It's keeping me from, my family's survival. I can't go to work because of this pandemic. I have to stay home when lockdowns. This is directly and visibly, very noticeably cutting across my ability to produce income, provide for my family, et cetera, et cetera. So when those kind of factors are at play, it's not even that it's that crazy of thinking. Some of these things are legitimate objections or legitimate concerns, I guess I could say. None of them are valid reasons not to wear a mask, but you see, but what I'm trying to make the point of is that, trying to make money for your family, trying to go to work and produce an income and all that, that's legit. That's a real world concern. It's not just somebody's, airy-fairy imagination at work. So the push-pull of those factors in every single individual's life is going to determine for that person where they're going to fall on these questions. Some of them might not even be of the mind that masks are, the tool of Satan or something, but their social circles are kind of a mind of that. And, and there's another factor here, which is hive mind, group mind, right? That the mob mentality tends to go lowest common denominator, tends to not think it tends to be very primitive in its thinking. Let's put it that way. Groups, mobs, they're not known for their intellect or nuance. So that's another layer of factor, peer pressure, social circles, et cetera. So there's a lot of factors at play here. So it's not just a matter for an individual. Maybe it should be in the best of all possible worlds, but it's not. But maybe it should be that you simply hear a piece of information or are given, here's why the masks are important. Here's why you should wear them. Here's what to do with them. And you just go, yeah, that makes sense. Boom, boom. And off you go, right? But for some of these people, it doesn't make sense to them. Really, if you get down to it, or it's somehow impinging or cutting across or somehow making their life, perceived to be making their life so bad, so horrible, so awful that they just couldn't even fathom doing something like that. Now, I'm not trying to say that all of the reasons these people are coming up with make sense to you. Makes sense to them. Doesn't have to make sense to you. It has to make sense to them. And this is kind of where the interventionist mindset comes in, right? If you're going to intervene in somebody else's life to get them out of a cult, you're going to have to take on the responsibility that you are making major life decisions for that person. And you better know what you're doing, and you better be sure that what you're doing is the right thing for them. In the case of a question about masks, there's really not a lot of question about that. We know the facts and evidence about that, and we know it's legit, and people should be wearing masks. Point I'm trying to make is those guys don't agree with the same facts you do. So it's not necessarily so much a matter of just cognitive dissonance as such. It's how the cognitive dissonance is resolved. And that's really what I've been talking about here this whole time, is all these factors are what, are the checklists or boxes that get used that, you sort of check. Yes, I should wear a mask. No, I shouldn't wear a mask. But. And even if a person can't articulate these ideas, even if they struggle with the words or to explain themselves, what I'm talking about is what is going on in their heads. The thoughts don't have to be clear-cut, logically sound arguments. They don't have to be that for the person to agree that, to accept them as true and use them as though they are legitimate arguments, okay? They don't have to make sense to you. They have to make sense to that person. So in dealing with people about this, my only piece of advice about it is that you have to take them where they're at. And you got to find out what the disagreement is, what the problem is, why is this an issue? Maybe it's a matter of Trump said so and that's all I need to hear. Okay, well, clearly then there's a whole nother situation there, right? Because if a person is willing to put their life at risk and the lives of everybody else at risk on the say-so of one person, then you've got somebody there who is, well, obviously listening to somebody that shouldn't be listening to, yet they're all in on that person. What do we call that, right? So there is that factor as well, okay? All of these things are factors with this. So I hope all that makes sense, and I hope that I'm giving a complete answer. I'm not leaving anything out, but those are the things that come to mind when you ask me that, and I hope that sheds a little bit of light on what could be going on there.